I'm going to need help on an analogy.
Okay. Yeah, I was just gonna say Brett and I thought 8:52, which was 5 minutes from when I talked to her. So like a few more minutes. I'm wondering whether or not you need to just let people know. I think
So
so.
my analogy you guys came up with was include, for us, the two birds that come from one stone.
Yes.
But we could probably get 100 unique critters with an ARU.
Yes. I like that analogy.
Yeah.
I feel like well like
I'm not
those
sure if 100 is right, but that would be,
well we have those species accumulation charts. What do we get to like 68 in the oil sand region or something like that?
That was actually like a wetland of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Within about 4 days, we had
Okay, so 100 seems reasonable.
that's right.
Okay, good.
good.
I think maybe I saw the bird accumulation side of that. But yeah, there's like a lot of other things too, right?
I think from a predator.
Yeah.
And some of the animals that eat prey as well.
Yeah.
I could probably look that up and give you
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I introduced wildfire myself a little bit, and then I plug the session.
So I think that would be the point of human interaction. So we can't talk about the two birds from one stone.
I almost feel like we're much more effective with 100 birds. But yeah, I totally agree. When our area is
We're just capturing data, okay?
yes,
Not killing
no
them.
killing. I like it. How are you this morning? Yes, please come over here. So we're gonna take lots of space.
The weather's going to be an issue.
Oh yeah, 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 for sure. So we're gonna start in about 5 minutes.
And so I will probably leave a little earlier.
Okay.
I like to leave right before 8.
Sure, sounds good. Yeah. We'll definitely give you all the updates. Sorry, I have to keep asking you if you're good. It's more like I just these kinds of events. I'm always like, does everyone have what they need? Everything went smoothly.
I'm the same way.
Okay, sure, sounds good. All right. Yeah.
Tomorrow we'll learn a lot about the sun.
Yes. You'll analyze some of this too.
Good morning, everyone.
Your computer's right there.
So we started a couple minutes late, but just to take into account the weather and everything getting here. So it's really fantastic to see everybody here today, and I'm so glad that you can make it out to ABMI's external forum. So thank you. So my name is Alex McPhail. I'm the research coordinator for the Bioacoustic Unit, which is a collaboration between the University of Alberta and the ABMI, and I'll be your MC for the forum today. I've been working with the ABMI for the past 7 years or so within the U of A. My background is actually as a field technician in the Boreal, so normally at this time of year you'd see me hip deep in snow, but right now I'm hip deep in suits and ties and that sort of thing. So a little bit out of my comfort zone, but it's really fantastic to see so many familiar faces. We have folks here from academia, government, indigenous groups, ENGOs, WPACs, the government, energy and forest sectors, and I'm sure I'm missing some people here, consulting groups. Ooh, nice. So yeah, we have really everybody from all over the place, so feel free to mingle and chat because there's probably a whole bunch of different people that are going to be able to share a lot of great information today, and that's really fundamentally why the ABMI does what it does in terms of collaborating and sharing ideas. But first and foremost, I'd like to extend a big thank you to the Royal Alberta Museum today and the fantastic job they've done at hosting this event. There really couldn't have been a better venue or location to do this today, so thank you very much for the RAM. And just a couple quick housekeeping items before we get started. I'm sure you've all seen the bathrooms that are just over to the side here. There's emergency exits if you just follow the green signs down the stairs and down the hall. And a couple other things. We do have some surveys that if everybody could take a minute to fill out, either on a coffee break or during lunch or before you leave today, it'd be fantastic. Your input is invaluable, so really we want to get your feedback on anything related to the ABMI or the forum. And also, we do have a door prize that you can win that we will be drawing just before lunch, and I believe there's a little bucket with some green tags that you guys can fill out your name in, and we'll be drawing that, yeah, like I said, just before lunch. So without further ado, I hope everybody's had a coffee and we're all awake and ready to roll. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Alwyn Baudouin, who is the Director of Natural History here at the RAM.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start by respectfully acknowledging the land on which we are gathered is Treaty 6 territory, traditional lands of First Nations and Métis people, and a meeting place for Indigenous people for thousands of years. So it's very appropriate that we're meeting here in this place on this day. It continues a long-standing tradition of meeting and sharing information. My name is Alwyn Baudouin, and I am the Director of Natural History here. I am actually wearing 3 labels today. I have my name tag, my other name tag, and then as I came in, they gave me a 3rd name tag. So I am absolutely no doubt about who I am today, which is probably a good thing. All the museum staff members who work with the ABMI project are in the Natural History section here at the museum. And the ABMI Processing Centre, for which Dr. Tyler Cobb is the director, is also located at the museum. And I thought I'd give you a little bit of a history and a little bit of a context about the place that you're in and the association that you're with today. The museum has a very long tradition of research in biodiversity and natural history, stretching right back to its opening in 1967. We opened on the Glenora site, and we just moved to this downtown site and opened on October the 3rd in 2018. So we're in a very brand new building here. At our opening, zoology and botany were 2 of the focus programs out of the 6 that we had to start with, the 6 curatorial programs. And so they were very much the focus of collecting. The museum opened with 6 programs, and now we have 13. And 8 of those curatorial programs, botany, geology, quaternary paleontology, quaternary environments, invertebrate zoology, ichthyology, ornithology, and mammalogy, are in natural history. So we have a considerable critical mass of expertise in those areas here at the museum. And working on biogeography, on taxonomy, distributional issues, issues in taxonomy and systematics, have been at the core of these programs for decades. So we're building here on a long-standing tradition of research in these areas. So there's a tremendous degree of synergy between the ABMI's focus and the focus of collecting and ongoing research here at the museum. It's a very good partnership and a very good fit, I think. On behalf of the museum, I'd like to welcome you all to this wonderful new facility. I've reviewed the program in detail. I've read pretty much all the abstracts. And I'm very keenly looking forward to the lively discussion and the sharing of information today. It's a very full program, I agree. But nevertheless, I hope you can take some time today to enjoy the space here, and that many of you perhaps will plan to come back a little bit later, perhaps with your families, and enjoy the new galleries. And I think the new Natural History Gallery on the 2nd floor, just across the hall, will be of particular interest to you. And I do also draw your attention to the Bug Gallery on the main floor, which has a lot of live invertebrates and is a huge hit with many visitors, especially the smaller visitors who really enjoy that. In the meantime, please enjoy your day here, and I'm looking forward to hearing everything that you have to say and spending some time sharing this information with you. And I extend to you a very warm museum welcome. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Stephen Lougheed. I'm the Executive Director of the ABMI, and thanks to Alwyn for shortening my presentation considerably, handling many of the things. I do want to say, however, though, a big thank you to the Royal Alberta Museum and particularly the important part it does play as the processing center for the ABMI. Just a quick overview of what you're going to hear a bit today. First presenters are going to start with a look back and a look forward. The ABMI is now about 20 years in its history. You'll get a bit more details in that, and as an operating entity in full operations over 10 years. We're going to talk a bit about the learnings we've had from conducting a full 10-year review in 2017, and the learnings from that. Going forward, we're also going to highlight some of the ongoing work that's come out of that 10-year review and the evolution that we're looking forward to. One of the things we're hoping to get today from the group here is some further input in terms of some of the additional things or directions or requirements that a number of our stakeholders, people in this room and others may have. So I'd like to get to that input. Again, when you're listening to the presentations, you may want to reflect on the value of the data that's been collected over the last 20 years through the program. This is an incredible asset that continues to increase in value. And so the value of the data over time does not disappear. We're building on that every year, and it's truly a remarkable asset if you think of any other jurisdiction in the world. We are also continuing to develop more partnerships with other data collectors and people to continue to try and add value to it. You're going to hear a bit about the important work in the geospatial and the information center to make all of this information and the data far more accessible and available. And again, most of it is totally publicly available. As having been collected, it's an asset that can be used by anybody. We're talking about on the East Coast, people using it right now. So just want to reflect on that. Now, I did want to mention, and when you're listening to the presentations and having hallway discussions, our program's continuing to evolve, and we're finding more and more users of the information for a number of applications. So municipalities, land managers, land trusts, and a number of others. So in your discussions in the hallways and here today, please consider also how you can work together with each other, maybe to look at collaborations that we should think about in terms of working across areas. Certainly getting more and more activity with forest companies, energy companies, other activities, indigenous communities starting to work together on some of the programs and leveraging the information we have. So want to talk about that. One of the other things you may want to reflect on, and questions to be talked about a little later, is we are continuing to evolve the program, but it's important to us that all of this data be accessible and usable. One example being the work we're doing with the oil sands monitoring programs. So the funders there are wanting to get more granularity to do additional focus work in those areas. And what we're trying to make sure we do is integrate that data, nested in a sense, if you think of Russian dolls, Russian stacking dolls. So if we're doing on any basis collecting of information, we want to make sure it's all seated together or nested in a way that's useful and preserves the value of the long-term work we've done. So those are just a couple of observations while you're listening to the presentations and having discussions. I do want to thank you all for coming here, and I'm sure there'll be a few more coming in slowly the further south or north that they live through the weather today. Thank you very much, and thanks again to the Royal Alberta Museum for hosting and supporting the work we do. Thank you.
All right, thank you both for starting us off. Okay, I guess we're getting to the guts to it now. So the next person that's going to be presenting is Jim Herbers. So Jim is not only the Application Center co-director, but he is also the Operations Director of the ABMI. So Jim's pretty much the guy that's getting stuff done at the ABMI, more or less. Jim's been involved with the ABMI for the last 15 years and has an extensive background in research planning and ecology, which he gained through projects in wildlife research and management as a consultant with the BC forest industry and the provincial government. And Jim will be talking briefly on the history of the ABMI, which is the slides you have up here. So well, let's invite Jim up to the stage.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Alex. I might be one of the few, well, I am probably the only one in the organization that doesn't really do anything, so I think we want to be honest in our acknowledgements. How do I advance? Right here?
And there's a big green button.
Good. So I'm looking backwards. I'm going to just set a little bit of context about the ABMI. Organizationally, the idea for the ABMI actually started with the forest industry and beginning to normalize or harmonize the way we monitor biodiversity in the forested parts of the province of Alberta. That idea originated in 1997-98, and it took a little while to get going. We spent a bunch of time in a development phase, analyzing protocols, assessing the value of collecting different types of information. And from 2003 to 2006, we ran a fairly large-scale prototype. So deploying a bunch of harmonized protocols across the province to see how they would work in different environments while building a business case for the ABMI. And that led to 2007. Formally, we were incorporated as a not-for-profit organization in the province of Alberta under the Alberta Societies Act. That marks the real start. We've got data sets that go much further back than 2007, but 2007 really marks the operational implementation of the program, and many of our core data sets start at 2007 and move forward. Between then and now, we've created an application center. So the idea in 2010 was we've got pretty big data sets that aren't being used as well by decision makers, managers across the province, and that we want to put more emphasis on getting the information into the hands of the people that can make decisions in this province. In 2012, we organized all of the geospatial work and we created a new center. So this would be our 6th center in the ABMI. And you'll get a view of that here quickly, the Geospatial Center. Most recently, 2017 marked the 10-year anniversary for the program, and there's a major undertaking to do a 10-year program review, looking at both science and stakeholder needs, and Tara Narwani and Shannon White will speak to that in the coming slides. 2017 and into 2018, we began to get the feedback, begin to understand and integrate that feedback from different stakeholders from the scientific community. And 2018 really marks another transition period, I think, for the ABMI, where we begin to look at major adjustments in the programming that we put forward. And you'll see that through much of the looking forward part rather than from a guy like me who's been around too long. I went back and I just grabbed a couple of slides that we actually used in the summer and fall of 2007. So these are verbatim slides that we used from the 2007 timeframe. Some of them are still relevant and give you a bit of context for why the program, what was motivating the decision making around the program more than 10 years ago now. So biodiversity, it's a very broad concept encompassing really small things to really big things. And it's complex in its nature and very difficult to manage. The business driver behind, or the business drivers at the time, and much of it still exists here today, two major business drivers. The first is for the public good, meaning that we've made significant commitments to be able to monitor, report against, and importantly manage different elements of biodiversity. And the next one is it's a business issue, meaning that the three major components here, making sure that we have access to markets to sell the goods and services from Alberta, the capital to make sure that we continue to invest in the province, and access to the resources, social license to operate, meaning are we working well with the communities that live and work in Alberta and maintain a social license to operate. It was recognized then, and it still is a big challenge. Biodiversity is a broad concept and was not well, single programs that look at individual species were not good representations of the overall health of the environment. or there can be a disconnect between the health of an individual species and the health of Alberta's environment. We also recognize that there's a lot of really good work, and often it's very specific. Grizzly Bear Project operated through the Foothills Research Institute. There's a lot of good work on caribou, but often those don't roll up well, or they don't nest well to tell the story of the entire province. At the time, we said there was no shortcuts. We just need to get out there and start measuring broad-scale biodiversity. This became kind of a hallmark for the program, systematically every 20 kilometers getting out, and each one of the dots on that map represents an investment of somewhere around 45 different protocols in wetlands and upland habitat types. So that became a big part of our identity and a big part of our focus. You'll see in coming slides that that's beginning to shift a little bit, but the original vision was to get back to each one of these sites on a 5-year rotation, so doing about 340 sites annually. There's 1,656 sites on that map. We haven't, 10 years later or 12 years later, fully completed the baseline for all of those, although a lot of them have been revisited. So we've done some parts of the province, in particular the oil sands area and the grasslands. We've resampled the exact same sites multiple times now, and some areas, particularly in the far northwest, we have a little bit of work to do to finish up getting our baseline. And that, the last bullet there, designed to detect change in the province's species and health, that was a big part of the foundation for the 10-year review, the science part of our 10-year review. At that time, we also recognized that there were many species assemblages that we wanted to monitor, so rather than picking an individual species, there were broad groups that we were interested in tracking change in the relative abundance, primarily relative abundance of each one of them. If you look carefully through that slide deck, there's a lot of taxonomic groups that don't exist as part of the ABMI's programming. One of the species groups or taxonomic groups that fell off the table very early, we invested a fair bit of time on looking at using beetles as an indicator group. That fell off very quickly. So even before 2007, we'd already put boots in the field and demonstrated that that wasn't going to work. And along the way, we also lost all of those groups for different reasons. Some of them were not feasible to collect decent data on, or just too cost ineffective. In the case of the bottom left, the fish monitoring program for the province, there are protocols, particularly the ones that are operated through Alberta Environment and Parks, through the oil sands monitoring system, I'm going to get that wrong, ACA? Yeah, the ACA also operates a lot of fish monitoring across the province, but there's no consolidated program that's collecting this data consistently in a systematic way. Not yet, anyway. That list continues to change. So we were filling gaps at the time in doing this broad scale stuff, and there's no expectation that this is going to be fixed in time. I think we need to be responsive to the stakeholder needs and what we're hearing, and what kind of data is being used. In addition, we spent a bunch of time looking at habitat features, both remotely sensed and field-based. So coarse woody debris in a field setting right up through to using satellite images to track human footprint. And those largely exist today intact from the original. But our business today, I think the slide deck at least, and our brand has improved. That's because I'm not involved with it. But the mission for the program remains the same. We're interested in the province of Alberta. So the geography that we're interested in deploying this kind of monitoring to continues to be the entire province, although the resolution, spatial scale and resolution of the types of data are likely to change depending on the stakeholder need. And our operating principles really haven't varied a whole lot in the last decade. As a program, we are member-based. We have a board of directors. The composition of the board today remains fairly broad, from the environmental community, government of Alberta, through to some of our industrial and academic partners. A few of them are represented here today. Organizationally, we now have our executive office, which is supported by our 6 centers. Science Center is responsible for taking care of all scientific matters within the entire program. Monitoring Center is organized out of Inotech, Alberta. I think I'll just put these up here right now. So it's organized, the science group actually composes of members from the University of Alberta, University of Calgary, and Inotech, Alberta. Our monitoring center is organized out of the Vegreville office with Inotech, Alberta. Processing center, it's already been mentioned, is here at the Royal Alberta Museum. And then our geospatial information and application centers are organized at the University of Alberta. As I said, the province of Alberta is the geography we're interested in. This map just shows the different land-based types. The Government of Canada, I'll call it, owns or administers significant parts of the province of Alberta, or is responsible for. The Government of Alberta, the green zone there represents 60% of Alberta, and those are largely public lands, and then the private part of the land base in the south and southeast is represented in the white zone there. Having said that, we are increasingly doing work outside of the borders of Alberta. So we have, particularly with our caribou monitoring unit, and trying to collect data in a similar or comparable way, either through study designs or monitoring designs within and beyond Alberta. Many of the questions that we face are not unique just to Alberta. And so recognizing that and helping to support some of that work is important. So I've only got 2 more slides here, but what you'll see moving forward is that from a program, we're interested in increasing our relevance locally. I guess the most relevant topic here is the oil sands, the work that's being done in the oil sands, and you'll see some adjustments as we go forward there. But that it won't be confined just to the oil sands, it's being more locally relevant. Increasing knowledge coordination, there's a lot of conversation here around different types of platform. So the data that you collect is comparable to the data that's collected by others and integrated in a fairly seamless way. We're all, by and large, I think we're all interested in the same kind of outcomes, which is making informed decisions using the best available information that we have. We have a number of geospatial initiatives that are continuing to evolve. The top 2 have more of a legacy here: enhanced land use or human footprint data, and increasing what we call ALPHA, the Advanced Land Cover Prediction and Habitat Assessment platform, which will be an integration of many different types of geospatial data. And then the last one is about acquiring in a group kind of setting. We're calling it GDA right now, geospatial data acquisition. So collecting data so that it is much more easily accessible for all in the province and beyond. We want to expand our ability to engage with stakeholders. That includes knowledge translation, continuing to publish. I don't think we can lose sight. First and foremost, we are a scientific organization, and most or many of our staff are very interested in continuing to publish and being a part of the research and academic community. And a big push here will be enhanced collaboration and cooperation, I would say, certainly for the next 5 years and beyond. So this is it for me. The last, I guess the next number of slides, decks coming up, presentations coming up, will be organized around these themes. So we'll have get a bit more insight into our species monitoring programs. It's not a program anymore, but multiple programs. Some of the application programs that we're operating, the geospatial and machine learning component of this, we'll hear from Jahan about that. Information systems and knowledge translations, Tara will be speaking to, and then taxonomic research, or the taxonomic component here at the Royal Alberta Museum. Tyler will be up to speak to us about that. And that's it. So I get the backwards part now, the fun.
Thanks, Jim. It's always so fantastic to see where the ABMI has come from and how much work they've been doing over the last 10 years or so. I do want to give a shout out to the monitoring center as well, because really all this data collection, the protocols, have really been collected by all those technicians and field coordinators who have put their sweat and blood over the years into collecting these data. So I do want to mention that as well. So next up is Tara Narwani and Shannon White, who are the directors of the Information Center and Science Center, respectively. Tara is a scientist by training, but a science communicator by heart. During her doctoral studies at the U of A, she began writing extensively about medical research as a freelance writer before finding herself at the ABMI in 2012. She's now leading the Information Center's responsibilities for knowledge translation, information management, and land access activities. Shannon had originally joined the ABMI in 2013, working on rangeland modeling, and after a stint with the provincial government, she's returned to the ABMI as the co-director of the Science Center. Shannon has extensive experience in developing strong scientific support in solving real-life problems, especially where science and policy intersect. She also has experience with invasive plants, land disturbance, and exploring the impacts of climate change on grassland diversity. That's a lot of stuff. So I'd like to invite Tara and Shannon to the stage to discuss the future of the ABMI.
Thank you, Alex. And I think Alex was trying to figure out how to describe himself earlier. He used to be hip deep in wetlands. Now he's hip deep in hip. If you haven't seen his tie, you should check it out. Yes, and the other thing I want to do is I wanted to thank Jim, and his looking backwards too. He excavated our PowerPoint presentations deck, our template from the early aughts. And yes, we have updated it more recently. So yeah, I get the opportunity to introduce our 10-year science and program review, some of the high-level results of that, and how that is changing the direction of our program in multiple ways going forward. So in 2017, as Jim mentioned, we marked 10 years of formal operations. And in that 10 years, actually a lot changed in terms of the context of environmental monitoring here in the province. First of all, in 2011, 2012, there was a joint agreement between the Government of Alberta and the Government of Canada to have an oil sands monitoring oversight for the oil sands region of the province. So that was a new player in terms of biodiversity and environmental monitoring in the province. Simultaneously, we've also had an evolution of the type of technology that's being used to do environmental monitoring. So over those 10 years, the course of the 10 years from 2007 to 2017, a lot has changed. And that forced us, or it gave us an opportunity to examine, had we met the original objectives, scientific objectives of the organization, and were there opportunities for us to evolve going forward? And were we actually meeting the needs of stakeholders, and could we be doing a better job on that front? So as I said here, 10 years was a good opportunity to evaluate this Institute's scientific framework and assess a range of products and services that the ABMI has provided and how they meet stakeholder needs. And the goal was to collect this information to really guide ABMI operations going forward. So we created a little infographic here to sort of demonstrate what the ABMI 10-year science and program review was comprised of. Really, there were two parts. On the left-hand side, we have the science review component of the review, and on the right-hand side, we have the stakeholder needs assessment component of the review. Each of those parallel processes were overseen by their own committee. So on the left here, we have a science expert committee. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And on the right-hand side here, we have the stakeholder advisory group. Each of those two groups submitted their own reports, so a science review report right here and a stakeholder needs assessment report, to a steering committee that provided oversight for the whole process. Ultimately, that steering committee submitted a series of recommendations to the ABMI Board of Directors. The ABMI Board has accepted all of those recommendations, and we're in the process of implementing those changes now. So to focus a little bit more on the science review, and Shannon White will speak a lot more in detail about some of the outcomes of that part of the work. But in 2007, the ABMI established a science goal for the program. And that goal was to monitor status, that's the distribution and abundance, as well as trend, or change over time, of biodiversity throughout Alberta. And in terms of biodiversity, that was species, habitat elements, as well as human footprint. So in order to actually evaluate whether or not we'd met this scientific goal, we did a number of analyses. First, had the ABMI achieved its monitoring goals for species, land cover, and human footprint elements? We also looked at the statistical power of the types of scientific analyses that the ABMI had been conducting over the past 10 years. And we also looked at a comparison of the ABMI's monitoring program with that of comparable jurisdictions around the world. So prior to the Science Expert Committee doing its work, we had ABMI staff as well as external contractors that essentially did all of those analyses that I just described. And together, those folks put together this 10-year science review document. This document was really the basis of the work of the Science Expert Committee and their evaluation of the ABMI's work over the past 10 years. There are also more than 30 technical reports supporting this work. A little bit about the Science Expert Committee itself. There were 5 members of this committee. They were chosen to really be experts in their field. Many of these people have run their own large-scale biodiversity monitoring programs. The other thing about them is they were either unfamiliar, totally unfamiliar, or not very familiar with the ABMI at all. So they had no stake in the game here. They really were outside experts providing peer review on the program. What happened was the Science Expert Committee came to Edmonton for a 2-day workshop, essentially, where they had the opportunity to go through all of the details of that science review report. They had read it in advance as well, and they got to ask additional questions of interest to them. And at the end of the day, the facilitator of that workshop created this final report over here on the right-hand side. Sorry, I went ahead there. So I'll just go back one. There we go. They created this science expert report right here. And that's available on our website, and I'll talk a little bit more of that if you want to read the details. But one of the key quotes that I've pulled out of the report is this one right here. The committee described the ABMI's progress to date as a monumental achievement and emphasized that its comprehensive approach, taxonomic breadth, spatial scale of monitoring, and temporal scale of monitoring to environmental monitoring is unique in the world. And for me as a science communicator, this is the story I really want to tell about the ABMI. This really is a Made in Alberta success story. We do have world-class environmental oversight in this province. We participate in other world-class provincial monitoring in this province as well. But certainly this is a Made in Alberta success story that I think we should all be aware of. So now I'm going to go and talk a little bit more about the stakeholder needs assessment side of things. On that side of things, really the process on the needs assessment was designed to evaluate the following thing. Did the ABMI create data and products relevant to stakeholders? And did we engage stakeholders on an ongoing basis to make sure that our information products met their business needs? In other words, are we mobilizing feedback into our product development process? A little bit about the stakeholder needs assessment process. There were really 3 major components to that work. We started with doing a bunch of interviews with our stakeholder advisory group members. These members represented multiple sectors across from Indigenous groups to municipalities to various governmental entities. So we did some detailed interviews to understand their information needs from the sector perspective. We also ran a pre-workshop online survey to really understand how people were gathering their information-based, biodiversity-based information products. Were they using ABMI's products, and if so, to what extent were they useful in meeting their business needs, and so forth. And then ultimately, we ran a series of sector workshops in the fall of 2017 to really do a deep dive on the needs and challenges faced by each of these sectors and how ABMI products and services could meet those needs. This here is just to give you a sense of the range of people that actually comprised our stakeholder advisory group. The details aren't so important, although we do have some of the representatives here in the room, just to give you a sense that we really tried to understand broadly across many sectors what different stakeholder information needs in terms of biodiversity are in this province. And here's a quote that came out of their final report, or actually 2 quotes. The ABMI's willingness to take risks in developing new information products was appreciated, and it was suggested some of the ABMI ancillary products put it on the cutting edge of environmental monitoring. And hopefully you'll hear some of some of those new products and services are. But, and here's the but, the committee felt that although there had been some engagement from the ABMI in developing products to meet stakeholder business needs, the engagement did not meet expectations. In other words, we were not doing stakeholder engagement in an ongoing and consistent fashion as we should be. And I'll talk a little bit about how we're adjusting to fill that gap. So I'll just talk a little bit now about what the steering committee had to say at a very high level. So the steering committee actually provided 10 recommendations to the ABMI board of directors. 9 of those they agreed upon unanimously. There was a dissenting voice with respect to the 10th recommendation. But there was unanimous agreement on the high level direction. First of all, the steering committee felt very strongly that the program needed to maintain its strong science foundation, that we had gotten the science right, and that was critical to the heart of the program. They also recommended that we optimize the program's value through prioritization and refinement, and Dr. Shannon White will speak a little bit more about that. And thirdly, we need to seek opportunities to increase the impact of the program. So I've provided some bullets under each of those last 2 points here to really talk about how we are adjusting with respect to those recommendations. So in terms of optimizing the program's value, of course, there is, as Stephen Lougheed mentioned earlier, we have an incredible species level data set that has been accumulated over the last 10 years, as well as multiple geospatial products that are used by multiple groups across the province. We need to leverage those existing assets, data assets. But going forward, we need to enhance and adjust field data collection to better meet stakeholder needs. And we are also developing the next generation geospatial science applications. In terms of increasing the program's impact, really we need to be implementing cross-cutting stakeholder engagement activities to do that, deepen and expand our collaborations, and deliver data valorization programs and platforms. So this is really how do we create that value add from the data that we have collected and continue to collect. So I've mentioned this website at abmi.ca. If you go there or at that URL at the top of the page here, you can actually see all of those reports that have been produced through the science review process. You can get those high-level recommendations as well as the ABMI's response to those recommendations, and you can get some detailed information on all of the different committees that were involved in the process. There is also a feedback form there, so if you want to give us some feedback on the process itself, the outcomes, or questions about how we're responding, please feel free to do that as well. So as Jim mentioned, going forward, this is really what the major programs at the ABMI has determined we will be running over the next few years. Of course, this may adjust as we go forward. One of the things I did want to mention, though, is that we are implementing stakeholder engagement as a cross-cutting capacity across the entire organization. So we want to make sure that all of these programs are meeting stakeholder needs and that we meet with stakeholders that are interested in each of these programs on an ongoing basis to make sure that we are doing that effectively, and if we need to adjust or tweak or enhance the programs, then we're getting the input that we need to do that. A little bit about our approach to stakeholder engagement. So this isn't just about handing out surveys or having fora. It's a suite of different activities that we are implementing in order to understand stakeholder needs. We're using the International Association of Public Participation spectrum of public participation. So there's a variety of different stakeholder engagement approaches you might take and that we will be taking depending on how you want to involve stakeholders or the public in your program development. So this spectrum goes from inform, where you're really telling your public or your stakeholders what you're doing and keeping them up to date, all the way through to empower here on the far right, which is essentially where you're implementing programs that are exactly what the public has told you that they want. So just to give you an example of what Involve looks like and what it has looked like at the ABMI already, the goal of Involve is to work with the public to make sure that concerns and aspirations are considered and understood. So this is making sure that we really have an idea of what stakeholder needs are and also perhaps how to implement those needs. But we are making decisions about how to do that implementation based on our own constraints and our own business needs as well. So in 2007, we actually did a workshop where we evaluated the ABMI's mapping portal. This is an interactive web-based viewer of our mapping products, and I'll be talking a bit more about that later. And essentially, we asked workshop participants the following questions. Is this tool useful to you in your work activities? How would you modify this tool to better meet your information needs? And what do you see as a primary barrier to using this tool? These are the same questions that we'll be asking those of you who are participating in our workshops this afternoon. And just to give you a sense, we had Mapping Portal version 1, which is the one that exists currently, and we are modifying that right now based on that stakeholder input that we received in 2017. So I'll be talking a little bit more how we've done this modification, but we took directly the input we received from different workshop participants in helping us design this next generation of that particular platform. So just to give you a sense again, depending on where we are in the Involve to Empower spectrum, we have a range of new stakeholder engagement activities that we are implementing in an ongoing, consistent way. To begin, we established a stakeholder engagement working group that has memberships from all of our centers. That working group really identifies priorities, make sure that we are responding to stakeholder feedback, make sure that we are implementing the programs or identifying the resources that we need to do that implementation, and closing the circle too in terms of telling stakeholders how we are responding to their feedback. There's a variety of different activities here, from webinars, lunch and learns, targeted news content, some of which we already do. But the webinars, for example, was something that we heard loud and clear from stakeholders, and we've just launched our webinar series. Second one that will be coming up soon is on our Alpha program. So if you're interested in that, please come to our website and sign up to it. Doing job shadows, direct interviews with users of our data, understand how they implement their particular work practice.
workshops, fora like this on an ongoing basis, subject review, expertise reviews on our new products, as well as bringing in end users as frequently as possible to review our products, and project co-design. So ultimately what we recognize here is that getting all this feedback is going to certainly help the program be as responsive as possible to emerging needs in terms of biodiversity monitoring in this province. And now I'll get the chance to pass it over to my colleague, Dr. Shannon White.
This thing?
Yeah, you press the play button.
Oh, very fancy. Okay, good morning, everyone. There's some new faces here, and I might be a new face to some people as well. I'm Shannon White, the co-director of the ABMI Science Centre. I'm also a research scientist through my joint appointment at Innotech, Alberta. And I've been in this position full-time since September, so I'm learning a bit here too. So I'm picking up from where Tara left off in terms of the results from the Science Expert Committee as part of the science review. And there was a lot of positive endorsement about the work that the ABMI has been doing. So a couple of the main quotes here: the ABMI is doing a very good to excellent job fulfilling its goals and objectives, exceeded expectations, and a great example of long-term biodiversity monitoring. I also stole a quote that Tara showed earlier. This is all great. It was good to hear this, especially coming into this new position and hearing about the positive feedback we received. But I think what's more interesting here is any of the constructive feedback that we received and how we're going to implement it going forward. So the Science Expert Committee didn't just tell us what we were doing right. They also identified areas where the ABMI may want to modify its program design. So I'll be going into that in some details. They also recommended that we might better engage stakeholders in decision-making and engagement. This echoes what Tara said, but it was interesting that we heard it from the science group as well. They recommended as well that we might consider enhancement of ABMI's activities beyond the original goals. So these type of activities are represented in some of our applied work. One of the areas that they recommended we continue to expand into is climate change, for example. And they had suggested that we explore ways to increase uptake of ABMI information by managers and researchers. This is really a keen interest of mine, and I'm hoping that today will serve to start fulfilling some of these bullets in terms of stakeholder engagement, and also maybe we can have some conversations about how you might be able to use the ABMI's data. There we go. So more details on what we heard about the program design. These are a few of the key bullets that we are able to action moving forward, and we've already started implementing lots of these as you'll see. One of the main suggestions was that we complete baseline sampling at all of those 1656 sites. Some of those sites, as Jim was explaining, we haven't visited yet. The Science Committee also suggested that we could look at reevaluating that 5-year return interval, and that we might be able to return to the sites at, say, 10 or 15-year return interval and still gain impactful results. They also said that we should consider targeted sampling in areas of concern due to chronic stressors. So in a way, this would mean going back to those sites that we expect to change less and have less frequent visits to those sites that we expect to change less, and that we target those sites that we expect to change more or where there's a lot of land disturbance or other pressures, and we put in the effort to return to those. They also suggested that some species groups could be sampled at a higher frequency. And those primarily would be some of them that they identified were birds and the mammals. Those species that we know there are a lot of changes from year to year, and they're also of importance to stakeholders. So we're currently actioning actually all of these, and you'll see this as I describe some of the changes that we're making to the program. And so the point I'd like to make is that this classic, for me, it's a classic slide of the 656 sites. What ABMI looked like in the past might look quite different from the map that we see in the future of what ABMI will look like in the future, while adhering to our initial values and the initial goals and objectives as well. So I'm going to speak about how these results impact our species monitoring first, and later in the presentation, I'll be touching on our application programs as well. One modification has been, instead of the one program, the 1656 sites, if you will, we now have 3 programs. So the first one, we've coined the Ecosystem Health Program, and it's a major checkup. Go into a few more details on it, but it's the full meal deal, 28 protocols from the mites to the mammals. We'd return to sites on that initially set 1566 sites. We'd return to those on a 15-year return interval. So we're putting in a lot of effort, but we're doing it less frequently. The second program is the Focal Species Program. This is a rapid checkup, and so it's focusing on those taxa that we expect to change, that are important to people, and also generally those for which we have really good technological advancements, so that it's more straightforward to do their monitoring. We can go in there and quickly put out the autonomous recording units or put out camera traps to model mammals. Definitely, this rapid checkup would include birds and mammals. We're still trying to figure out how we address plants and perhaps aquatic invertebrates, and I'd be happy to receive feedback from some of you in the audience today about this. The idea is that we'd be going back to sites more frequently here, so every 2 years. And then as a third component, a third program, we have a targeted species monitoring program. This one is still in its initial stages, but one example of the work that we'd be doing through this program is some work understanding how lichens can be used as indicators of contaminant levels. So a little more information on each of those programs. Again, the Ecosystem Health Program, full meal deal. We're sticking to the systematic random design. It's repeated measures. We go back to the same sites again so that we have a better chance of detecting change. And we're hoping that we'd be able to return to about 40 sites per year, and that would put us on that 15-year return interval once those baseline sites are completed. The baseline is significantly complete, but we're continuing to sample some of these for the next couple of years to fill in any gaps. So what kind of information does this provide? Who has been using this information? This informs really broadly state of the environment reporting, and I'll be touching on some of these examples later on, and as well helps us understand if we see any impacts, are they due to natural and human activities? So here I have some examples of the type of information that we've been able to produce from the data that we've already collected through this program. This is a snapshot from the oil sands region, and I'll be continuing to use the oil sands region as a case study as we go through the 3 programs and their application, because this is one of the regions in which we've received a lot of feedback, and we've been eager to implement that feedback and pivot the direction of our program to respond. So in the oil sands region, we've been able to break down for any particular species what % of any population change is due to different sectors, including energy sector, but we haven't been able to really drill down into what is it about the energy sector or any other sector that might be causing change. We've also been able to understand how many species show declines versus how many species show increases, and that's represented by these phase diagrams here. We can do this for birds, for plants, for all of the taxa that we've been monitoring. So there's already a lot of key information that's coming out of this ecosystem health program, but we're looking to build on that and develop more targeted information on cause and drivers, especially for, in this case, the oil sands region. Focal Areas Program, or focal species program. It's a rapid checkup, and we would only be conducting probably 2 to 4 protocols. So like I said, the birds and the mammals would be key under this program. And the idea of this program is that it's well aligned with the needs of our stakeholders in this region. So we look at identifying the drivers of change and the impact. That means a study design that can really confirm why is it that we're seeing change and disentangle exactly what types of footprint, and also confirm that we're seeing change due to the oil sands industry, or are we seeing change due to climate change. So the study design is actually focused on confirming any changes that we see. So like I said, we want to attribute impacts to specific oil sands activities, and we want to use this information to inform management in the oil sands industry. We've heard that from the energy sector, so going down the mitigation hierarchy. For this design, our vision is that we have thousands of sites. We don't have that right now. I think ABMI has on the order of a few hundred cameras for mammal monitoring that we can put out. But our vision is that we'd actually be working with partners, perhaps some of you in the audience, to do a more comprehensive monitoring of the region. We're looking at a stratified design, so purposely going out to monitor in areas where we expect high impact, and then also monitoring in areas that serve as controls so that we can really drill down to causation of any change. Again, we'd like to see repeated measures design, so going back every 1 or 2 years, and to really roll this out, we're going to need major cooperation. So this program is still in its early stages of development. Hot off the presses of the GIS work I have on my laptop, we're trying to look at what kind of sites in the oil sands region would actually reflect what we're looking for. And I spoke a bit about the targeted species programs. I think the key here is that it's still in its early stages of development, and the idea is that we would identify drivers of change and impact, but it would be for the local abundance of specific species. So that's a summary of the changes and the modifications that we're implementing in our species monitoring program. I want to speak to one more point about our species monitoring program, which is that the idea is that all these 3 programs nest together. And so when we're putting out a highly concentrated array of cameras in a highly impacted area of the oil sands region, we can make conclusions on the landscape scale about change. We can then compare that to the information that we're receiving at the regional scale, and we can use information from the local site to local scale to understand drivers. Our design is taking this all into consideration in terms of layering all of the program designs so that they can inform each other across scales. For our application programs, there are 3 programs that I'd like to highlight. Caribou monitoring, which I believe Melanie will be going into more detail in soon after this presentation, as well as support for community-based monitoring in Indigenous communities, and regional planning. The Caribou Monitoring Unit, or the CMU, supports woodland caribou recovery in Western Canada. And it does this in 3 buckets. One of them is research in regards to comparing impacts between, or understanding the relative contribution of impacts from human footprint versus climate. And it does this by sampling along a gradient of latitude as well along different human footprint impacts and how climate and human footprint impact caribou density. The other bucket is restoration, largely of seismic lines. So understanding, creating tools, where should we prioritize restoration of seismic lines? What are the goals and how would we track that? And then as well, testing some of the various recovery options that exist for caribou, such as maternity pens and exclosures. One point I want to make with the Caribou Monitoring Unit is the wide spectrum of partner organizations that make this work happen. And CMU is a really good example of this. We need all of these organizations together. We're doing so much more than we could, any one of us could on our own. And this is really the direction that ABMI is looking to move into in the future and keep on strengthening our relationships. Community-based monitoring projects. This is quite new to the ABMI, but we have some projects going. The driving principles behind these are a bit different than some of our other ABMI-led projects. In this one, the motivation is really to address community questions or concerns. And so we've been following a model where any design of sampling design has been co-designed with communities. And the emphasis is on community capacity building. So for example, if there's a desire to train environmental technicians in the communities, then we'd be working with those communities to achieve that goal. And ABMI, rather than leading these projects, is more of a service provider on individual projects' work plan. And here you can see in the bottom right one of the maps from the work that we're doing with the Cold Lake First Nation. Last but not least, supporting the land use framework and the biodiversity management frameworks in particular remains a key area of focus for us. And so the ABMI has been able to assess across the province and in a consistent manner some key biodiversity indicators, such as non-native plants, biodiversity intactness, native vegetation, and interior habitat or human-created edge. As we do this, we can then start reporting out on whatever land use framework region of interest is of interest from the provincial government. And so we've been quite involved in supporting this work. And that's it. Thank you. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Shannon. So before we break for coffee, we're actually going to put aside about 10 or 15 minutes or so for question periods. So how we'll do this is I believe we'll have some microphones, which Brett is setting up right now. So if you have a question, please feel free to ask. Maybe introduce yourself as well first so that we know who you are and who you're working with. And we'll go from there. Y'all are too shy.
We have our first question.
Hello, can you hear me? I'm unaffiliated, which means I'm retired from government work and previous involvement with the biodiversity monitoring program. I'm really interested in hearing about the push into trying to sort out cause and effect relationships, how the ABMI sort of manages that interface between the monitoring function, which is sort of a change detection function, and what I would see as more the research function, which is the cause and effect function, and what are the risks of getting pulled more and more into that research area, or is there a handoff that's required? So I'm just kind of interested in how you manage that interface.
That's a very good question, and it's an area that we are constantly discussing at the management team. I think the model that it looks like the ABMI took originally was more of a surveillance-based monitoring, and the outcome from the science review being that we can return to sites with less frequency and still meet our objectives opened up some resources to focus in other areas. And so I like to think of it not necessarily as shifting from monitoring to research, but from surveillance-based monitoring, adding in some question-based monitoring, which if you look at the literature, there's actually a lot of support for question-based monitoring. You know, there's pros and cons for each of those approaches. I think the other key is making sure that the programs that we implement remain nested and that we retain some flexibility so that if it looks like there's a need for increased surveillance monitoring because we're not seeing impacts in that cause and effect realm, that we can pivot back and forth. Does that answer your question?
Got a question in the back here.
Adam Norris with the Mighty Peace Watershed Alliance. As monitoring continues to concentrate itself in the oil sands region, I'm just curious how we are going to monitor the rest of the province and understand how landscapes that don't have such a heavy, intense industrial footprint, how we're going to track changes there and see how they function. I know EMSD is focusing their concentration of monitoring up there as well as industry groups. So just a question towards how do we get a fuller picture of Alberta and the ecozones across the province.
Yeah, thanks. So the vision is very consistent in that we want provincial coverage of data. The 3 species programs that Shannon discussed, the first one is the Ecosystem Health Program, and that is operational across the province. So the investment continues to be within and outside of in a comparable way. The resolution in terms of stepping it down and getting finer detail on the different types of human footprint, how they interact in a cumulative way or in an isolated way, the work is progressing most quickly in the oil sands. Our expectation, or at least our vision, is that that continues to roll out in other parts of the province, particularly those where there's a strong interest in, or we're expecting change. So the oil sands region is by far not the most impacted part of this province. So the grasslands and more particularly the parkland parts of this province are much more heavily impacted by industry. But we're probably expecting more change in the foothills, some parts of the southern east slopes, and in the oil sands region in terms of development from the existing condition to a future condition of more industrial development. That's where a lot of that activity is happening. And those areas are likely then to receive more attention in terms of the step down in cause and effect. To get that done, I don't think it's our challenge alone. I think it is a cooperative challenge, and we need to be working with other major agencies, including federal, provincial governments, local governments, to make that happen in a collective way. And that doesn't mean that we need to take on the work, but we need to organize ourselves as a larger community to make that happen.
I might add one more thing before bringing the mic up there. Part of the issue too is demand and funding. So we have, and I think as you all discuss things today, there's when people have an interest in an area, that will be what happens. So a lot of that was in the land use planning and others. A lot of the work we've done there. We are seeing now we're working with a forest company who's funding fill in areas that they think is important and others. So it's actually part of what Tara was talking about, the whole area of outreach and understanding where that demand is. We're talking to municipalities and some of their needs under legislation. So the more loud voices that are requiring this information, that probably is a commercial on our part, is make some noise.
Hi, Susan Kokas, just a concerned citizen. And I hear you speaking about collectively and collaboratively. How does citizen science, how can you incorporate that into your research?
Thanks, Susan, for the question. Actually, citizen science is really a growing area in the ABMI's work going forward. One of the things I'll present in a presentation later on today is we launched Nature Links, which is an ABMI, which is a citizen science application for desktop and mobile devices. And the key thing there is it's designed to help really support either individual or organization-based initiatives around citizen science efforts. So it's not just about collecting ABMI type data. It's if you are as an organization or as an individual have a specific interest in tracking the distribution of a particular fungal species, for example, you can set up an environment on the app to help you collect that data and then share that data more broadly. And second to that, we also have what we call the Wild Tracks program, which we will be talking about more later as well, which is really an environmental sensor network platform. So it's a way for processing and managing data, but it's also a community that we hope to, where we bring together different groups that deploy cameras, remote cameras, or autonomous recording units out either onto an individual's farm or with a particular organization to really bring all that data that's being collected by different interests under one roof so that data can be shared and help inform decision making as well. So there will be a citizen science arm to that work as well. So thank you. Yeah, definitely there's a lot of activity in that area.
Good morning. My name's Steve McMahon. I'm with Alberta Innovates. My question has to do with how are you leveraging information technology today to gather more data, and excuse me, what the information technology field could do more for you if we were to get more innovative.
Thanks for your question, Steve. First of all, I'll be presenting a little bit more, probably within a half an hour, to speak to some of those issues. But what I would say is that right now, we're developing a bunch of different platforms that aren't as interoperable as we would like them to be. So I think what we're going to be creating within our organization is sort of like an API economy. So basically, really having a lot of these application programming interfaces that allow for the movement of data across platforms. But I would like us as an organization to plug into the greater API economy that exists here in Alberta and beyond. So in other words, how do we push data out and pull data in different ways that really allow us to do that data valorization or provide that value add? How do we allow people to interrogate our data in ways that meet their needs, or we push data out to other platforms where that type of work is also happening? That's one thing. And the second piece I will just add really quickly is we're really looking at the application of machine learning, artificial intelligence, in terms of helping us develop ways in which to, for example, create auto recognition to allow us to process data more rapidly, to reduce the human intervention time in data curation. That will then allow us to do a lot more of that analytical work that we would like to do. So I would love to tap into any of the resources that exist in Alberta and beyond to be able to do those two things.
I might add to that, Steve. Thank you for the question, and Alberta Innovates may be able to help in some of that area. Certainly the University of Alberta has been very helpful in some of the machine learning, the auto recognition, and others. I would suggest, and we've had interest from across Canada on Wild Tracks and a number of other developments that we've worked on. But from the development point of view of this app community, this is probably the most extensive database of this type of information anywhere. And there's certainly global market for it. So, you know, we should be looking at ways to leverage that. Certainly as we go into community-based monitoring and others with platforms, there's opportunity to leverage the experience and the needs that are developing in these areas to develop new technologies in that area. So thank you very much, and we'll be talking to you.
Any other questions? Right here.
Hi, Jana Casson with Alberta Agriculture and Forestry Land Use Unit. I just have a question, and maybe I missed it in Shannon's talk, I'm not sure, but it's related to the cause and effect question that was mentioned before. I'm just curious about the human spatial footprint layer and how often that will be looked at in order to pair up with the biodiversity data and look at those cause and effect relationships, especially with the rapid land use changes that we see in Alberta. So yeah.
Hi, I'm Jahan. I didn't present yet, but I'll be after the break. I'll be presenting after the break. But I'll address the question on the human footprint. So human footprint is now updated on an annual basis. So that's one of the major changes that happened in the last year or so. But in addition to that, we're also looking into a number of ways how to enhance and update human footprint information that's being created by the ABMI through a number of the partnerships and collaboration, including the oil sands monitoring programs initiative, as well as working with industry directly, like for instance on regeneration attribution. So basically, the intent is to produce the state-of-the-art human footprint information, but given some of the limitations, we taking it one step at a time. And then I guess, as Shannon kind of alluded to that the intent is to look into then how different human footprint types, or basically how it is varies by industry and how that impacts biodiversity and or individual species or their habitats.
I think we had another question over here.
Yeah, it's Carolyn Campbell with Alberta Wilderness Association. Thanks for the informative updates about some of the program shifts. My question, I guess, is about wetlands, and certainly maybe the most focus going on is in oil sands monitoring work. But in addition to the ongoing or historic monitoring by ABMI of things like aquatic invertebrates and plant communities and wetlands, some of the things that Shannon was talking about shifting to more stressor response made me want to ask about how ABMI work might be paired with other kind of sensor work around hydrology changes, because I think that's maybe pervasive but still somewhat under our radar. Human activities affecting wetland hydrology and watershed connectivity, and how that might show up in habitats, plants, and ultimately, you know, other organisms. Could you comment perhaps on those kinds of links?
Sure, I'll also ask if Aaron Bain is here yet. No. Okay, Jahan, you can add to my answer then. Yeah, so I mean, I'll start by answering that saying as we monitor broadly, and as we maintain the province-wide surveillance monitoring, any change that we see in wetlands could be due to a number of factors. And so we're still monitoring at that level of the true cumulative effects. Now, to understand, is any change that we see due to changes in hydrology or due to some other factor can be done to some extent through modeling exercises, but we are also looking at partnering on projects that would look specifically at, for example, the dewatering that occurs with mines. And I was hoping Aaron Bain will be speaking later today, but I know he's been doing some thinking on how we would target that specific impact. So it's something that we're looking at in terms of addressing as a partner organization and answering those questions, because our data could very much contribute to answering it. But at the time being, any of our work still remains sensitive to that pressure along with the multitude of other pressures.
Yeah, and I also wanted to add that I'll be presenting some of the examples, but most of the examples will be presented this afternoon, I believe, during the workshop sessions. So, but I'll be presenting some of the examples, how we're trying to tackle those kind of questions, and basically trying to address water-related, surface water-related questions and issues using the remotely sensed data, so the geospatial data and the geospatial science.
So I'll have to be the bearer of bad news, but I'll cut it short there just so that we stay on time today. So we will go out for a bio break, grab another coffee, and we'll try to reconvene here around 10:20. So see you then.